Hi everyone, welcome back to the next instalment of the Britain's Energy Course Business Cluster Shadowboard podcast. I'm Jason Savage, I'm the current chair of the Shadowboard, and today I'm joined by Lee, who is one of our board directors, but soon to be appointed as chair. So, hi Lee, do you want to start with giving us a little bit about who you are, a bit of your career history to date, and what you're up to now?
Yeah, no worries. Morning, Jason. So Lee Grears, soon to be chair of BECBC, something that it's crept up on me, let's say, and never once thought that I would be chair of BECBC, let's say. So Lee Grears, I'm also the managing director of Responsive and its associated companies in Cumbria, in Manchester, and in Southampton.
So you've got all these businesses now, but let's go back to where you first started. So you didn't just go straight into owning Responsive. How did you we left school, and then where did you sort of go to from there?
Yeah, now this is a long story, isn't it? It gets longer every year that goes by, obviously. So I left school. I actually left school early. So I'm mindful that I'm speaking to a shadow board director, let's say, with a younger audience than what my normal audience might be. So when I say I left school early with no qualifications, don't take that as a good thing to be doing by leaving school early with no qualifications. It's not all good. It does make life a little bit harder to start with, at least. But true story. Left school with no qualifications. Finished early in the 5th year of school. I moved school actually in the 5th year, and just didn't really fit in and see the point of that in the last few months, and missed my exams at the end of that, which left me obviously in a sticky situation, let's say, for what do I do now as a 16-ish year old, and not really that many career options in the west of Cumbria. Certainly not as many for somebody that's left school without qualification, let's say. So my only option at the time really was to go to college, try and gain back some qualification and grow up a little bit as fast as I could within 6 months, let's say, and start at college. Didn't know what I wanted to be, and when I attended college, it was you should be a welder. Oh, that's great. What's a welder? What's a welder do? So I'll do that. Get some people off my backs, and as it happens, I suppose they say the rest is history, isn't it? From that point in, but yeah, I became a welder. Years go by, I worked at a few places local ourselves. Alan Dawson Associates, who's no longer there, was up at Lillyall next to West Cumberland Engineering, O'Connor Fencing. Funny enough, one of O'Connor Fencing's staff have just been elected to the main board of BECBC. So it swings and roundabouts, it turn of the tide. You never know you're going to bump back into in the future, let's say. And eventually I found myself at BE Systems at Barrow-in-Furness. So as a welder on nuclear submarines. And it wasn't until then that I come across inspection, non-destructive testing. So whilst you're the best welder in the world, is what I'll say to anybody, you're as good as your last weld, obviously. In your mind, you're the best welder in the world. I still wasn't aware of that integrity of the testing and what might go into that. And obviously, if there's anywhere to learn some form of inspection and testing, BE Systems producing submarines, taking 120-ish people down to depths of thousands of meters, it needs to be pretty integral. And a job came on the board, actually a trainee position came on the board for 2 trainee welding inspectors. And I put in for one of those with no expectation to get that. Expectations pretty low as of previous years of leaving school without qualifications and so on. Not being a local to Barrow-in-Furness, and as much as we all love each other as Cumbrians, it can be quite interesting when you come from the west of Cumbria and you head to Barrow-in-Furness and start working among a place where you don't belong, let's say. I can't go into some of the jokes, but it's quite amusing. But it's a good place to work anyways, and lo and behold, I got into inspection, going into testing, and if really from that point in, the rest is history. It forged a career where I didn't know existed. The layman, if you're yourself, for instance, you've no idea, you've no need to, for that matter, understand and know what inspection and stuff goes into daily life. You just go about your being and expect everything to be integral. You're walking down the road, that lamppost isn't going to fall down and do you over as such. But yet, unbeknown to people, they're tested every 12 months, as an example of, in terms of lampposts, for instance. You just expect it to work. I ended up leaving BE. The travel became too much. I had young children and so on, and I moved to Tata Steel, as it was at the time, Tata Steel Projects, or TSP in Workington now. And took up an inspection role at TSP, and from there then moved into Sellafield and decided that I wanted to set up my own business and see how that went. I actually decided there's a little bit of a front story to that. Was I decided I wanted to build a boat while I was at Sellafield, so I took this little unit to build a boat, and quickly that ended up on a trailer outside my new workshop, let's say, and it turned into a business because people said, could you do this inspection, or could you fit this in, and so on. So it was a little bit of a natural progression, really. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I was a contractor at that point in time. Once I'd left BE Systems, I was a contractor. Even for TSP and for Sellafield, I was self-employed, limited company. So on paper, when you see responsive, it says 2011, February 28th. That's actually the date I left and was leaving BE Systems, and set myself up as a one-man band type scenario. So the reality is 2016 was the real date for let's turn this into a business and make something from it. And the thought process was more of sustainability. I've got a young family, I've got a house. We need some form of future. We need something to potentially have in place. Let's say, should everything else go wrong, I get paid off tomorrow as a contractor, for instance. That was the backup plan. So no going back now, unfortunately. Fully committed and a few businesses in now.
Yeah, and you've got quite a few employees now, and you're growing. And you just mentioned Southampton. Did you say you're expanding across outside of Cumbria now as well? Yeah,
so we just dropped that in loosely at the minute because we're building Southampton. So whilst it hasn't been massively publicised, let's say, we're still sort of putting together the bricks and mortar, if you like, the internals of what that facility looks like. We've got somebody down there now that's heading that off for us and pulling that together. But again, it's back onto that system. If I can boil anything back to a single word, let's say, it's on the sustainability. It's how do we spread that risk? So they're all offering a similar service, but it's very difficult to offer a service in Southampton from Cumbria. One, because you're not local to that area. Layman's terms, you don't speak the lingo, let's say, I suppose, and you could assume that the same does apply to Cumbria in some instances, albeit with some anchored institutions, obviously with Sellafields and so on, we do see a lot more of external sort of influence. Different in other areas of the UK, and I'm mindful of that. Exactly the same with Manchester as well. So we need the right people in the right places, but it is ultimately just to make sure that we could offer a service as quick as possible across the UK, which then sustains all of our business, as a whole.
Great. So from that, how did you get involved in BECBC to then obviously become and get elected as a director? When did you first sort of get involved with the cluster?
Do you know what? I'm not actually quite sure. When did I get involved there? I'm trying to think, when did we join as a member of the cluster? We won the Small Business of the Year. I think it was, if I remember right, it was a former title. I don't think it exists now as one of the award categories. That was 2016. So we've been a member probably not long before that, I would assume.
Yeah.
2015-ish, I would have thought. So got involved with the cluster, and it was the same as anything else, really. I mean, my background's welding, it's inspection and stuff like that. As much as I can talk till the cows come home. Former life as a DJ and stuff like that when I was a child, and all that kind of good stuff. Really, the reality is that I didn't really know anything about business. It just happened around us, and it just sort of grew naturally, and that's good. That's great to an extent. Then you realise that you're not exploring all avenues of getting that business in. So we joined the cluster for that reason, because it was a really easy option to pay a couple £100 and join somewhere that had a 300 member audience, if you like, to get involved in that. So probably around the 2016 mark, early 16, then we ended up winning the Small Business of the Year, the cluster. We've stayed involved ever since then.
And then from obviously you won that award, and you've gone through and you've opened different businesses and stuff, and then you were elected as a board member only just last year.
Yeah, just over 12 months ago, I think.
Yeah, and then moving into obviously moving into the chair position, elected at the AGM, which, as recording this, is next week. So as chair, and we spoke about before we sort of started this, but as chair, how do you think you're going to take the cluster forward, recognising that the previous chair, Ivan's done a great job and he's been in the role for many years. However, the cluster's changed a little bit since then in terms of operating model with a CEO. We've got a full board of people from a diverse range of backgrounds. Where do you sort of see yourself taking the cluster? Is it more of a strategic, looking at the next couple of years and things like that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing to point out is that I don't plan far too far in advance. Let's say I'm a very much here and now type. And let's look at the next months, year, potentially, maybe a couple of years on that, and see what that looks like. And the reason being is I think that's probably the small business in me, the mentality of that small business. So the quick and the agile, and the being able to change because something externally has changed, something's influencing something else, and so on. And I think that's probably the difference between where BECBC was, and it was very stable, and this is happening on Sellafield and so on, or as an example of, to now coming out the back of a pandemic, as an absolute starting point, and everything else that goes with that. What's happening with Ukraine, with Russia, and our own internal markets now off the back of that. Those very here and now, nobody could have planned for that, over a 5-year plan. That was impossible. And that's sort of the way I tend to operate, is around that. So it's what's happening, how do we navigate, how do we play, and what's our next hand in that ultimately. You're right, the BECBC structure's changed. And I'm not fully sure how that pans out, is my honest answer. And I think that's probably the best way for it to be as well. So we've got a member organisation with 250 plus members, paying members, that elect a board, myself and obviously the rest of the board, in place, in my mind, to represent those people that are paying said membership. And if we can't then take back the feedback, the ideas, the thought process, what's happening down on the ground, as board of directors, back into the board and try and make that work, as well as look at future planning of what might be coming up and trying to feed that backwards again, then we shouldn't be elected as board of directors if that's the case. It is very much a member organisation, and I think that's where it should always boil back to. So regardless of all decisions, it should be based on member focus, quite literally. And I think with the change in structure, with Diane obviously now in place as Chief Executive Officer, the daily running, the daily grind, if you like, all the visual stuff that you see, how the organisation operates, and stuff like that. That's very different to how BECBC has been for the previous forever. Let's say it wasn't a role that existed. So we had Ivan, like you're saying, has done an absolutely outstanding job, and I'm so pleased he is staying on the board of directors for the next, I'm going to say, foreseeable. We're keeping him. He's staying in. It's obviously he knows what he's doing in terms of chairing a board. Let's say in this sense. So we're keeping Ivan on the board. I think the focus as the new chairman really needs to be more a traditional type chairman role, let's say, because we've now got the CEO that's doing quite a bit, if not the majority of what you've seen physically of Ivan out in the public domain. So looking on strategic matters for the board, for instance, leading that board, ensuring the governance of, and so on and so on and so on. I think that's probably the role that I will end up falling into, albeit experience from an SME perspective and how that looks now. 80+% of the UK, and coincidentally our membership is based on SMEs. So if we can fetch let's say a voice from an SME perspective right into the board, which was a good starting point, and then put it into chairman's position, then I just see that as very fitting for now, for what's happening in the area, in industry, in the world for that matter. Looking after the small man rather than the larger companies. And I don't mean that by any disrespectful means. I just realise that is a majority of people, such as members again. I
think that's really important, and I think that potentially is why, obviously, you were elected to the board to begin with, but also why you've been put into the chair position, because of exactly what you've just said. At the minute, the cluster is majority smaller businesses, and it's really important that we nurture those and support those, taking their feedback in and delivering things for the members, because we are a membership organisation, and people and small companies pay their membership just like the big companies do, and we should be listening to them and taking the cluster forward that way.
There's a good drive to be had on that, isn't there? We've got larger companies certainly around this area where they're saying, we want to work with SMEs, we want to work with smaller companies, we want to work with SMEs that have forged their own frameworks of other smaller companies and collaborations. And I think we could be almost a catalyst for that. We can go and say, listen, we can almost rally these troops. We can fetch these smaller companies together and still present them to the bigger companies, which are our bigger organisation members. In which case, we've created a win-win situation for everybody. We've created an environment where everybody can thrive.
Yeah, great. So leading from that and taking the things you said before, I know you sort of said at the beginning, don't say this is the thing, I left school with no qualifications. That's don't everybody do that. But there is a little bit of a thing around that, isn't there? Depending on what you want to do for a young person, say, leaving school, there are some requirements to maybe get onto apprenticeships with various different companies, qualifications, etc. However, you've got to be it's the journey, isn't it? And I think a lot of people think that they've got to make a decision right there and then, maybe not just even leaving school, even people, in the early 20s or whatever, that they've got to do something and then they're stuck at that forever. But I think you're a great example where actually you left school, realised you could have to just do that. Because someone said to you, do you want to be a welder? You said, yeah, all right, I'll give it a go. And then you've progressed through that to go into, a similar field, but actually finding a need and finding something you're interested in, and thinking about the lamppost example is really good, because you're right. We just expect things to be right, but they're only going to be right if they're tested and checked and someone makes them right. So have you got any sort of any other quirks or any advice for young people who maybe they want to start their own business, but they're not quite sure sort of how to go about that, or maybe they are at school and you're thinking, you know what, I hate school, I hate this environment, but I feel like I'm stuck here because I need to do this. Have you got any sort of any thoughts on that?
Yeah, interestingly, just sort of listening to you speak. I mean, I'm 37-year-old, and I'm still not quite sure. I want to know. I know what I want to do when I grow up. So I don't know what that'll come down to when I'm 50-year-old. Let's say maybe a bit of a midlife crisis on the go. I'm not quite sure, but I think you're right. Times have changed. I mean, one of my children's leaving school this year, as a prime example of, and very much like me. Other than he's obviously still at school and completing exams. He didn't have a clue what he wanted to do. It hasn't helped with 2 years of COVID, right from year 10, obviously from GCSEs onwards. That hasn't done any favours, obviously, with the lack of work experience and placements and stuff like that happening. But yeah, I don't see I can't imagine, let's say, a job for life anymore. I couldn't think to myself, BE Systems is potentially a good example of that, because there is people there that start there right from school and they have a really good career and a really good life from BE Systems. They will always be at BE Systems. The good thing is, I suppose, for that is there is a lot of potential in different roles to be able to do, to move into, should you so wish to do, let's say. But I think in the real world is, why do you need fixed to one job anymore? Can you not just get a firm background in something that's sort of potentially not so much cross-discipline, but something that's a good starting point to get you into another discipline? I don't see the point in being tied down specifically to something and thinking this is it. I don't feel for a second that you're going to give that all of your 100% of interest and best thoughts. I just can't imagine it being the case. And I think I've always sort of been like that, really, is what's next? What now? What can we do differently? I think if I was in a job, I would, for somebody else, I would probably end up being a totally different role to what I'm doing now. Probably a different profession, doing something totally different. I don't know what it'd be, but I wouldn't be focused on that being fixed for the next 44 years of, after me leaving for school, for instance. 5, 6 years, let's have a look, see what's now. You can always build on that. And, the biggest part is you don't want to get to the end of that with the regret, do you? That I wish I'd done that. Why didn't I do that? Time's ticked on and it is potentially too late. But yeah, I mean, I had a guy work for me when we first started out. He was 64-year-old and he'd just got into inspection. He'd been a welder all his life. At 64-year-old, he wanted to change profession and so on. And that for me, that's probably the best life lesson I could have ever have had, is seeing somebody at 64 want to retrain, want to go on all these professional courses. And the guy should have or could have retired, years earlier. So yeah, don't be fixed. Have a bit of an open mindset and just think about, I'll do this for now and get a firm grounding and see what happens in 2 years' time. Why not?
Yeah, I like that. No, that was good. That's a good. I think that's some really good advice, particularly around this area as well. Okay, so that's great. And that's it. Thank you very much, Lee, for your time. Really good to listen about your background, how you've moved into owning a few businesses. It's really good advice there, I think, for young people listening in the cluster and wider in West Cumbria. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Thank you.